Bad workday doesn't always feel like a bad workday when it's your own business. Most of the time, it feels like evidence that you're not working hard enough, don't know enough, or even just flat out aren't good enough. And that's what makes it so painful. It's not just, I didn't get as much done today as I wanted to. It becomes, why didn't I get more done? Why couldn't I stay focused? Why did I avoid the important things again? What does this say about me? And what does this say about the business? What if this is the reason I'm not successful as I thought I'd be by now? And once your mind starts going there, you're not just dealing with your workload anymore. You're now also dealing with the interpretation of your workload. That's what I want to break down in this video, because this is the system underneath a lot of what we've already talked about in a couple of other videos, which you can watch here and here. In the first video, we talked about how the business you built for freedom can start to feel like it owns your internal state. In the second video, we talked about why starting first with increasing discipline doesn't always work. And then in the third video, we talked about why avoidance isn't always laziness, procrastination, or perfectionism. Now we need to look at the actual sequence that makes those things happen. Most entrepreneurs are experts in their own field, not neuropsychology. But that's exactly why I'm here, to break down and explain super clearly exactly what's going on in your mind when you get triggered and then start spiraling. Unless you're incredibly self-aware and familiar with neuro-auto-associative programming, you probably don't notice what's happening. It usually just feels like the day got away from you. You sat down to work, saw everything in front of you, started feeling behind, avoided the important tasks, got pulled into lower risk tasks, and then by the end of the day, you felt frustrated with yourself because you knew you didn't really show up the way you wanted to. And the obvious explanation is, I had a bad day, or maybe you just felt off or distracted. But underneath that bad day, there's usually a pattern. You focus on a particular thing, and then you start creating assumptions or beliefs about that experience. Maybe it's an email from a sales lead, or maybe you see that your profit loss report shows a net loss for the fourth month in a row. That perspective and interpretation that you choose, even if that choice happens subconsciously, shifts your internal state. Your mood and your emotions shift, and your mind starts spiraling. And that mental state then pushes you towards actions that line up with the state that you're in. This is where the avoidance, the procrastination, the worrying, etc. start happening. There's so much more we could cover with that in so much more depth, but that's the gist of it. Your brain is designed with three distinct powers. You get to choose what you focus on, the meaning you assign to what you focused on, and what action you take based on how you process the information that you took in. Focus, meaning, action. And if you don't see and understand that system, you end up trying to fix the last part of the pattern while the first part keeps recreating it. Let's use the example we've been coming back to. You have a really good morning, or at least a decent one. Maybe it doesn't go perfectly, but you do enough of the things that you're supposed to do that you feel like you should be ready for the day. Then you sit down at your desk and you look at everything in front of you. There's the work that needs to be done, but it's not just the amount of work. It's how much of it seems like it needs to be done really well. You're not just answering an email, you're trying to move the relationship forward. You're making decisions that feel like they affect whether the business keeps moving forward. And this is where the pattern begins. Instead of your focus being on, what's the next useful move? It starts going towards everything that could go wrong if the day doesn't go well. The lead might not close, the content might not work, the campaign might not perform, the project might take longer than expected, this month might not be where it needs to be. The answer isn't to pretend like the business doesn't matter or to tell yourself that there are no consequences. Sometimes the work in front of you genuinely deserves your attention. The issue is that your focus starts leaving the part you can influence and starts getting absorbed by the parts you can't fully control. You can influence how you show up to the call, but you can't fully control whether the person buys. You can make a better decision with the information you have, but you can't remove all uncertainty from the decision. And when your focus gets locked onto the uncertain parts, your energy starts leaking. You're still sitting at the desk, but part of your mind is already out in the future trying to solve every possible consequence of the thing not working. Most entrepreneurs know what it feels like when your mind stops working on the task and starts working on the threat. That's focus. Then comes meaning. Meaning is what your mind says about this moment, about what you just took in. It's your interpretations and your perspectives about your business, your future, your capabilities. So your focus might be on all the unfinished parts of your to-do list, but then the meaning becomes, I'm not disciplined enough. Your focus might be on the parts of the product launch that didn't go according to plan. Your focus might be on which customers didn't buy today, but then your meaning becomes, no one cares about my product. And this is how a bad workday can feel so much bigger than just a regular workday on its own. The workday becomes a mirror, and everything that didn't go perfectly starts reflecting something back about you. That's where business pressure becomes identity pressure. It stops being, that call didn't close, and starts becoming, maybe I'm not good at sales. And it stops being, I didn't finish the task, and it starts becoming, I'm not disciplined. And once the meaning gets personal, your internal state changes. This is where people shift into what we call confined state. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Your vision narrows, your body gets tense, your mind starts moving really quickly, but not really clearly, just quickly. You lose access to creativity, to flexibility, to confidence, to patience, problem solving, all of those higher brain functions. Your brain is processing everything through the interpretation of threat and pressure and urgency and what could go wrong. That's the frustrating part. Because the moment when you need access to your best thinking is often the moment when pressure makes that thinking harder to do. You need to write really clearly, but your mind is busy judging whether the post will work. You need to follow up with that lead, but part of you is already bracing for what it'll mean if they just don't respond or they just flat out reject your offer. So now your action and your internal state changes. And this is where the internal pattern starts to become visible. You avoid the important work. You get busy with the smaller tasks. You tweak what's already good enough. You overthink the strategy. You finally force yourself to work again, but it feels like you're just dragging yourself uphill. Or you push through with enough pressure and shame and force in order to get something done, and still at the end of the day, you're left feeling burnt out with no energy and really no motivation to work hard the next day. That's why our behavior can be so confusing, because from the outside, it just looks like procrastination or inconsistency. But inside, the behavior is downstream from the whole internal sequence that's already been happening. Your focus got really narrow, the meaning got really personal, and your state shifted. Then your action followed that state change. And after the action happens, the last part of the system is the evidence that you're left with. This is where the pattern begins to reinforce itself. If you didn't get enough done today, now your mind says, see, I'm not disciplined enough. And if you ended the day scatterbrained and stressed out, now your mind is telling you, see, I can't keep it up. So the results get used as proof of that meaning that you focused on. And then the next day starts off with more pressure based on that evidence. You're not starting from neutral anymore. You're starting with yesterday's evidence and proof, last week's evidence and proof. The launch that didn't work, the post that didn't land with your ideal client, the sales call that didn't close, and the private internal fear that maybe all of this says something about whether you're capable. And that's how the pattern compounds. Our bad workday becomes more than just one bad workday. It becomes part of a case that your mind is building against you. And this is why people can get stuck in that feeling of, I'm not where I should be. Because the business gives you endless opportunities to prove that. If your mind is looking for evidence that you're behind, entrepreneurship will grant you plenty of opportunities. And unfortunately, our brain's default is to look for all the evidence that proves that we're not capable or proves that there is a threat out there. But remember, we have a choice of what it is we focus on. And if we focus on the threat and the evidence that we're behind, that's what we'll start to feel and notice more. But instead, if we choose to focus on and reinforce the evidence that we're making progress, that we do have some wins in there, that we are moving towards a successful career, then that's what we'll find. And that's what will shape the meaning and the interpretation and the evidence and the actions and the state change that we're looking for. But just because your mind can find evidence for something doesn't mean that that's the most accurate or helpful meaning. This is where a lot of entrepreneurs lose so much energy. They're not only doing the work, they're also constantly litigating what that work means for them. What does it mean that I didn't get enough done today? What does it mean that I'm not growing as fast as I thought I would? And underneath a lot of those questions is one deeper fear. What if this means I'm not good enough? Most people don't even recognize that that's what's happening. It usually hides deep down underneath several layers of conscious thoughts. It usually hides inside more acceptable language like, I'm just not disciplined enough, or I should be further along, or I just need a better strategy. And sometimes those things may be partly true. Maybe you do need better discipline in one area. Maybe your strategy does need to improve. But the problem is when those observations become identity conclusions. That's the big difference between this strategy needs to work and I don't know what I'm doing. There's a big difference between I didn't finish what I planned today and I'm not disciplined enough. The meaning that we choose to apply to what we focused on determines the state that we act from next. If the meaning is this gives me information, you may still feel disappointed, but you can use that. You can run with it and do something with it. You can adjust your offer or tweak your product a little bit. But if the meaning is this proves I'm failing, your system is going to respond very differently. You're more likely to tighten up, to avoid or procrastinate, to overcorrect or chase a new strategy, or just try to force yourself to work harder in a way that obviously wasn't working before. The meaning that we choose completely changes the experience. The answer is not to become delusional. I don't want you to look at a failing campaign and say, this is amazing. Look at all this great feedback. I don't want you to look at an empty calendar and pretend everything's fine. You shouldn't just ignore the fact that a business needs revenue and clients and leads and everything else. The point is to stop adding a second layer of suffering that makes you less able to respond to that reality. If a lead doesn't close, that's information. If a launch underperforms, that's also information. But the moment that information becomes, this proves I'm not capable, you lose access to the part of you that can actually use that information really well. It's the difference between what we call free state and confined state. Free state, you say, this didn't work the way I wanted. What can I learn? What needs to change? What's the next best move? In confined state, you typically say something like, this didn't work the way I wanted to, so maybe I'm the problem. Maybe the business is doomed and maybe I need to either force myself harder or escape the feeling somehow. One gives you more access to your incredible brain and the other locks you out of it and drains your energy. You feel this in your body. When you're in that confined state, everything just feels more tight and tense. Your thinking just gets more limited. You're more likely to see landmines instead of doors. You're likely to focus on collateral damage instead of collateral gains. And you start judging the situation for not being what you wanted it to be instead of asking how to use what's actually in front of you and what's still available to you. That's why a bad workday spirals so quickly. It's not only because the day was hard, it's because the meaning that you chose and you applied to that experience. So the work is not just to fix your schedule or to increase discipline. The deeper, more important work is learning to catch that sequence and that pattern earlier. Where did my focus go? What did I make that experience mean? In what state did that interpretation shift me into? What actions are available to me now? That's where you start getting your personal power and your internal command back. Because if you only notice the pattern at the end of the day, after you've already avoided the work and then judged yourself for it later, your only option is regret. But if you can catch it earlier, when your focus first starts moving towards threat, and when the meaning first starts becoming personal, then you have more room to work with the pattern before it starts taking over your whole day. That's the practical value of seeing and understanding this system. You stop treating every bad workday like a mystery and a reflection of who you are. You stop treating every avoidance pattern like a character flaw, and you stop treating every disappointing result like a verdict. And instead, you can start asking yourself, what happened here? And that allows you to interrupt the pattern when it's actually being created. Because if you can change your focus, you can change your emotional, mental state and what actions you take. If you can change the meaning and the perspectives that you choose, you can totally shift how that experience feels and consequently what emotional state you put yourself into. And if you can change your internal state, you can change everything. Not only does the experience feel better, but you're able to access more of your brain and take more powerful, meaningful, impactful actions to improve your business and to improve your life. That's the shift. And that's what the final video in this series is about. Because once you can see the system, the next question is, how do I actually build the capacity to respond differently when the pressure is still very real? I don't need the help when everything is easy or when the schedule is perfect or when the leads are warm and the campaign is working? How do I build the capacity to stay more connected to myself when the steps in front of me aren't what I wanted them to be? That's what we're going to talk about next. If you're ready to start working on this struggle that we've been discussing here in this video, you can book a discovery call with me to see if the Live Free program is the right fit for helping you move forward. But the next best step is to watch the final video, because that's where we're going to talk about what it actually looks like to feel free again inside the business that you're building.